We continue with the 8th chapter of the book of Nechemiah, end of 7. The Jews had settled in their towns. The walls have already been rebuilt. Nechemiah has created not a bureaucracy, but has appointed people to guard over Jerusalem and guard over, the city, to ensure that the city will remain and that people will remain in charge. And now we continue. Vaye asvu chol ha'am ki ish echad el harechov asher lifnei sha'ar hamayim. Vayomru le'Ezra sofer lavi et sefer Torah Moshe tzivah Adonai et Yisrael. So all the people gathered together as one. We had a similar expression back in the book of Ezra, which brings us back especially here with the reading of the Torah by Ezra to the idea, of course, of Har Sinai, where it talks about the singular, and then Chazal tell us that Bnei Yisrael were united at the time of Matan Torah, Kish Echad B'Leiv Echad. So all the Jewish people, all the returnees are together in front of the water gate, and they ask Ezra the scribe to bring the Torah of Moshe, the teaching of Moshe, which God had commanded to Israel, to be read in front of them. So we mentioned many times in this book, Nehemiah, of course, is always coupled with Ezra. Ezra came back with his group about 14 years earlier than Nehemiah. We don't hear anything about Ezra in this book until this time. Ezra is described here as a sofer, as a scribe. Ezra is more of a religious leader. Nehemiah is the hatrashta. Nehemiah is much more of the political leader. Nehemiah rebuilds the walls of Jerusalem. Nehemiah fortifies the city. But here we're moving from really the fortification of the city. We're moving to now substantive teaching and Torah matters. So it says in verse 2, Vayavi Ezra hakohen et haTorah lifnei hakahal mi'ish v'ad isha v'chol mevin lishmoa biyom echad lechodesh hashvi'i. And so Ezra brings forth the Torah, and Ezra is a kohen, in front of the entire congregation, men and women who could listen and understand it. And when does he do so? On the first day of the 7th month, what we call Rosh Hashanah. Vayikra vo lifnei harechov asher lifnei sha'ar hamayim min ha'or an machatzit hayom neged ha'anashim v'hanashim v'hamivinim v'oznei kol ha'am el sefer haTorah. And he reads it facing the square. Again, they're in front of the water gate from the early morning until midday. And he reads it to the men and to the women, those who could understand. And everybody, right, the ears of all people were given to the scroll of the teaching. Vayamod Ezra sofer al migdal eitz asher asula davar. Vayamod etzlo matatya v'shema v'anaya v'uriya v'chilkiya u'ma'aseya al yemino u'mismolo pidaya u'mishael u'malkiya v'chusham v'cheshbadana Zechariah mishulam. Ezra stood on a wooden sort of a tower or a wooden stand, and there were a number of people with him. And in their names, many of the names have the Yud Hey at the end, or El in them, relating them to God, relating them to the divine, which I think part of it is right. This is not a time of nisim niglim, of outright miracles, of obvious apparent miracles. The sea has not split, the water didn't turn red. So one way of sort of expressing the idea that God is with us, that God is here, is making a name like that. Not just Uriah, Anaya, Chilkiah, right? All the godliness is here, even if it is a little bit hidden at times from the Jewish people, and it's not as obvious. By the way, I believe one of the opinions of the Gemara, we read 6 aliyot on Yom Kippur, corresponds to the number of people. 6 people who are on the right of Ezra and 6 people who are on the left of Ezra. So there are different halachot learned out from here related to different areas. And now we see what happens. And just for a second, remember back, it's not that long ago. Historically, it was only a decade or so before. And for us, it was only a couple of weeks back when we learned about Ezra, hearing about the Jews intermarrying and him crying and his worry that just as the temple was destroyed 80 years for 130 or so years earlier, that the second temple would be destroyed 70 or 80 years in when Ezra returns to, I should say about 60 years in, when Ezra returns and he finds this out, and he's crying and tearing his clothing and not eating, and the people agree to separate from their wives and get rid of the non-Jews and really to focus much more on who they are and their religion as a people. And so here we have now Ezra once again. What he was doing in the intervening 10 years, we're not told. But here we have, let's see what's going to happen this time when he once again is having a public, this is not public prayer, but a public reading of the Torah. So here in Pasuk Hey, Vayiftach Ezra sofer leinei kol ha'am ki me'al kol ha'am haya uchefitcho Amdu Chol Ha'am. Ezra opened the scroll in the sight of all the people. He was standing above them all. He was on this sort of this stand, elevated on this wooden stand of some sort. And he opened up, the people stood up, they saw the Torah. It sounds like Hagba. Vayivarech Ezra et Adonai Elohim Hagadol. Vayanu Chol Ha'am, Amen, Amen. B'mo'al yedehem vayikdu vayishtachavu ladonai apayim arza. So Ezra blesses the great God, and all the people say Amen, Amen. They raise up their hands, they bow down, they go all the way down like we do on Yom Kippur, prostrate themselves before God with their faces to the ground. V'yeshua uvani v'sheirevya Yamin, Akuv, Shabtai, Hodia, Masiya, Klita, Azariah, Yozavad, Hanan, Pliaya, Valevim, Mivinim etam, La Torah, Va'am, Al Umdam. And we have a list of a number of people, again, a lot of them with the Yud Hey at the end. These people and the Levites explain the teachings to the people while the people stood in their places. Maybe some of them couldn't hear it properly. Imagine that the main problem here is that the people, the spoken language was Aramaic and not Hebrew. And so many of the people, not just those who came from Persia, who came from Babylon, but even that was the spoken language in Israel. And so there were those who were then, one, translating it, or maybe giving further explanation to apply it to their lives, different ways of understanding it. But the most basic understanding is, of course, just the translation. The Targum, as it's called. Vayikru v'sefer b'torat Elohim miforash b'shum seichel vayavinu b'mikra. They read from the scroll of the Torah, translating it and giving the sense so they could understand the reading and understand the way that it was understood, that everybody should be able to understand the Torah, and it should be explained properly, translated, let everybody get a full explanation. Torah is not supposed to be hidden and secret, it's supposed to be obvious for everybody. And now we go from Ezra in verse 9 to now Nechemiah comes back. Vayomer Nechemiah, hu hatir shata, the Ezra Kohen hasofer, v'alevim avinim et ha'am l'chol ha'am. Okay, so we have both Nechemiah and Ezra and the Leviim who are translating. They say to all the people, Hayom kodesh hu l'Adonai Elohechem, Al titablu v'al tivku kivochim kol ha'am kishamam et divrei haTorah. So this is, we're going to say B before A in this verse. A, what happens is the people hear the Torah and they start crying. They're crying presumably because they're not listening. They haven't listened to the requirements the Torah gave to them. It's not clear, other than sort of the foreign wives, exactly what the things are that they are not listening to, but they're told to listen to God's commandments in the Torah. And so their reaction is crying. They're not listening properly. But Nechemiah and Ezra and the Leviim turn to them and say to them, Rosh Hashanah is a day of happiness. It's a day of Kedusha. It's not a day for mourning. It's not a day for crying. And by the way, this is a big, many shiurim have been given around Rosh Hashanah time about the nature of Rosh Hashanah. Is it a joyous holiday or is it a sad holiday? On the one hand, it's sad, it's scary. The Sifrei Chaim, the Sifrei Meitim, Ptuchim Lefanav, the book of life and the book of death are in front of God. How are we going to be judged? What is going to happen? But on the other hand, it's a day, as described here, is a day of joy, a day of happiness. And here verse 10 expresses what they should do. Vayomer lahem lechu ichlu mashmanim v'shibtu mamtakim v'shilchu manot le'ein nachono ki kadosh hayom la'adonenu v'al te'atzvu ki chedvat Adonai hi ma'uschem. And they go and they say, go and eat good food and drink, sugary drinks, and also send presents, send food to others. Mishloach manot, we of course know it more from Purim. This is around the same time. Send gifts to those who have nothing prepared, because today is the day of God. Don't be sad, because when your chedva, your rejoicing, your happiness is a source of your strength, is the source of your strength for you, a source of strength for God. And there is an old custom, again, coming back to sort of Rosh Hashanah, where there are people who would fast for 10 days for the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, presumably during the day and not at night. I don't know what they would do on Erev Yom Kippur. Maybe they would eat right before Yom Kippur. And some people would fast on Rosh Hashanah. There are others who started earlier. In fact, there are those who say maybe that's why the Ashkenazi custom is to start at least 4 days prior to Rosh Hashanah with Slichot, because there are 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, presumably a Shabbat. There has to be a Shabbat at some point. And Erev Yom Kippur, you can't really fast. So it's those 4 days before, sort of like a makeup. But there was a custom. Some people would fast on Rosh Hashanah. Here, the text says, no, you're not supposed to fast. This is a time of joy and happiness. We're in verse 7. Levites were quieting the people, saying, be quiet. Today is holy. Don't be sad. Don't be, The people went and they enjoyed themselves. They ate and they drank and they sent food to people who didn't have. They understood what they were told. Vayom Hasheni, which we still call Rosh Hashanah, but they didn't back then. So the heads of the clans of the people and the priests and the Levites, they gather. So it's not everybody, it's more of the leadership. They go to hear more of the Torah and to be taught by Ezra. And they found written in the teaching of God that God commanded Moses that they have to have the holiday of Sukkot. They have to sit in booths and observe the holiday during the 7th month. And announcements were made and proclamations were made throughout Jerusalem and all the other towns where the Jews had returned to, telling them, go to the mountains, right? Go to the forest, go get the leafy branches, the olive trees, the pine trees, and myrtles and palms and leafy trees, and make booths. As it is written, Vayetzuam, we're told in verse 16, Vayavu vayasu lahem Sukkot ish al gago, uvechatzrotehem, uvechatzrot Beit Elohim, uvrachov shar hamayim, vrachov shar Ephraim, and it was a sukkah fest. They went out and they got, all the wood they needed, all the materials they needed, and they made booths for themselves on their roofs and their courtyards, in the courtyards near of the Beit HaMikdash, and the water square where the Torah was read, and the square of the Ephraim gate. Vayesu chol hakahal hashavim min ashvi Sukkot vayeshvu vasukot. And here is a very strange phrase which is discussed. Ki lo asu mimei Yoshua benun kain. B'nai Yisrael ana yomahu vati simchad b'dola ba'od. The whole community returned from captivity, made booths, and dwelled in the booths, something that the Israelites had not done from the days of Yoshua until that day, and there was very great rejoicing. And obviously that's a very strange thing that the Jews for 500 years, for 600 years, didn't build Sukkot, or those who say, no, it's going back to Yeshua because this is the return of the people during the time of the Second Temple. And of course, Yeshua led them in the First Temple. Those who saying was the joy and the happiness that they had was like the original Sukkot that God gave them in the desert, that different ways of understanding this verse, which seems on its face to imply that the Jews did not build Sukkot for 600 or so years. Continue in verse 18, Vayikra b'Sefer Torah Elohim Yom b'Yom min hayom rishon ad hayom acharon ve'asu chag shivat yamim ve'yom hashmini atzeret kamishpat. Each and every day the Torah was read for the 7 days of Sukkot, and so too on the 8th day on Shmini Atzeret. And so we have a chapter here where we see, again, and this is similar but goes further, the building, the walls are not enough. There needs to be substance. There needs to be Torah. There needs to be instruction. There needs to be something that the society stands for. And here Ezra reads them the Torah. They understand more about who they are, what they should be, what they should aspire to. People are very affected by it. It's very rare in our people, or most people, hear what they're supposed to do and have a negative sentiment and reaction to it. Here, they're very, very upset that they are not keeping the mitzvot in the way that God has asked them and told them, demanded it from them. And we see great celebration of the holiday of Sukkot, and of course, many, many questions about it. And so at this point in time, the return to the second Beit HaMikdash with Ezra and Nechemiah is very, very successful. Jews have returned. They're listening to mitzvot. And it seems that things will work out very, very well for the Jewish people. We know it's not such a simple time, and the second Beit HaMikdash is rife with all sorts of difficulties and problems. But at this point in time, things are looking up. And for the people, it's a great return and a great joyous time where they really celebrate the holiday of Sukkot.